Good morning, my friends. Today is Monday, February 15th. And in the story of Ruth, which can be found in the book of Ruth in the Bible, we learn of a woman named Ruth who decides to follow a different path in life. She had been living in a land outside of Israel with her mother in law. And through some calamities and troubled times in that land, Ruth and her mother in law, Naomi, decide to return to Israel. And Ruth has to give up all that she's known, her homeland, her customs, her people, to do this. And the interesting thing about this story is that she also has to give up her way of knowing what she thought about God in her life. And she decides to follow Naomi and her people in their understanding of God. And when they go back to Naomi's homeland, uh, they still have to do things for themselves. They still have to harvest grain in order to eat. They still have to take care of one another. But they have placed their total trust in the one God. Naomi and Ruth finally find blessing again in their life. Ruth gets married. She's able to take care of her mother in law for the rest of her life, and the story ends very nicely. This week we start the season of Lent, and Lent is about placing ourselves on a path that fully trusts in God. Ruth didn't necessarily have a bunch of sins she was leaving behind in her previous homeland, or perhaps she did. What she was doing, however, is turning toward God and letting her whole life depend on God's blessing. This is what we are asked to do during Lent, to look at ways that we may not be following the path of God, things that we may have said or done or thought that we wish we didn't, or things that we may have said or done that we wish we would have. And these now are the times that we turn to God, we ask for forgiveness, we ask for help in making these things right in our lives. And then we put our trust in God to lead us forward in a way that would not only make us happy and fulfilled, but would actually be following God's will in our lives. God's will is to make us happy and fulfilled. So as we enter into this season of Lent beginning on Wednesday, let's just try to identify all the different ways that we may be separated from God, that we may not be thinking of God, that we may not be following God every day of our lives, even down to every minute of our lives. Finally, I want to mention, if you were to ask me why am I dressed in a tie this morning, it is because there is a baptism later on this morning at church. And I mention this because, during this time of continued pandemic and separation and illness and death all around us, it's nice to remember and to see that babies are still being born, families are still loving one another and this new child, bringing this child into a path toward God by following the way of Jesus Christ. And so let us all pray this morning that the world will continue to heal, new life will continue to be born, and that all of us may continue to place ourselves into the care of God. Will you pray with me, please? Holy and all-loving God, continue to come into our lives as we open our hearts to you. Lead us in your ways. Help us to see all the ways in which we may have turned aside from you or from others. Bring us back onto the path that you would have us follow, a path toward happiness and wholeness for ourselves and indeed the whole world. Amen.